we know well, after being together for some while, the alchemy and chemistry of stories. So let's test it out yet again and see what arises for us out of three very different tales. The first is the story of Mullah Nasruddin. There was a time when there were very hard times in his land, and he was forced to go out and gather wood to sell in the village. But he and his donkey were both quite old at this time. One day, when he'd laden his old donkey, that was called Kokosan, with a load of wood, they came to a river that they had to cross. And of course, after they'd crossed the river, the load of wood got very heavy on Kokosan's back. So when they staggered out of the water, Kokosan's knees buckled under him, and Mullah Nasruddin recognized that his old donkey wasn't able to go on any further. So, having great pity for the beast, he took off the load of wood from its back, and he sat down pondering what it was that he could do. And then suddenly his old friend Hussein happened to be passing by, and Hussein said, "Oh, looks like your old donkey's had it, Mullah." And the Mullah said, "Yes, he's quite old now. He can't even carry the load of wood that I've managed to gather." Hussein said, "Well, I've got something that might perk him up a little bit." So he took out from under his cape a little bottle, and he handed it to the Mullah, and he said, "Mullah, just put a dab of this under his tail, and it'll liven him up." Well, Hussein went hurrying off down the road on going about his business, and the Mullah Nasruddin took out a little piece of rag from his satchel where he had his lunch, and put a dab of what was in the bottle on, and then lifted up Kokosan's tail and put it on. Well, suddenly Kokosan's ears stood up, his tail went down, shot off towards the river. Well, poor Mullah Nasruddin didn't know what to do. Kokosan was long gone, and here was he left with his load of wood. What was he going to do? So, of course, all he could do was put the load of wood on his own back and stagger along the road towards home. And he just got so exhausted, he said, "I just can't go on any further." And then he remembered, he said, "Oh, well, if it works for Kokosan, it might work too." So he got his little piece of rag, he put another dab on it, put it on his trousers and stuck it again, and off! He went down towards the river, and there were both of their asses in. After the Mullah got home, of course, he looked at the label on the bottom. Pure ammonia. Then there's that little Zen story about the shogun's courtier, a member of his court, who wanted to learn the art of swordsmanship. So he went to the greatest swordmaster in the land to seek tuition from him. Now the swordmaster prided himself on being able to recognize the caliber of all men. So when the courtier walked in and made his request, the master demanded of him, "Well, what swordman school have you been to?" And the courtier said, "Master, I don't know the ways of the sword at all. I've never had a sword in my..." "Don't lie to me," said the master. "What school of swordsmanship have you been tutored in?" Well, the courtier was very abashed and said, "But Lord, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to deceive you in any way, but I have honestly never been to any school, nor do I know the ways of the sword. Well, the master was a little bit chastened by this and was a little bit more attentive to what the courtier was saying. And then the courtier had a thought. He said, well, Master, could I just tell you that in my youth I experienced and came close to death. So I decided to study death. I read books on death, I thought about death in great depth, and in the process of doing so, I lost all my fear of what is called death. The master looked at the courtier and said, go, go. You are already a master. You need learn nothing about the ways of the sword. And then finally, there's a story about a young couple. They were very devoted to one another. They loved one another, and every day they said to one another how much they adored each other. In fact, in the course of all of this love adulation, they decided that if one of them died, that the other would remain devoted to them until the day again where they could meet in paradise. So, as is the way of life, the wife got deathly ill and died. The husband was completely and totally bereft. He wept and he wailed day after day after day. But, you know, life is life, and it was necessary for him every day to go to the baker's shop and buy his loaf of daily bread. And as we know well the ways of nature and the chemistry of nature, one day when the husband, the widower, was at the baker's shop, he happened to notice the comely figure of the baker's daughter behind her apron. Well, that very night it started. I saw you. I saw the way you looked at her. But of course, nature has its way, and every day he would go to the baker's shop and buy his loaf of bread, and he would get into conversation with the baker's daughter. And then he'd go home and it would be on. I heard you. I heard what you said to her. I saw the way you looked at her. His nights were tortured, absolutely tortured from that moment on, until it got totally unbearable for him. He couldn't stand, because every day he would go to the shop, and every day there's a little bit of chemistry working between them, and conversations were taking place, and at night he would be beset and told word for word what it was that he'd said, what he'd done. So it was terrible. He was torn, absolutely, totally torn. So he decided that he had to do something about it. So he had heard that there was a very wise man, a sage, living outside the village. So he decided to go and seek his counsel. So when he got there, the way of sages, they kind of know everything anyway. And he said, "Oh, you having problems, her? Yes, yes, she knows everything about you, her. Yes, everything. She knows absolutely everything." "Yes," said the man, in a state of great nervousness. "Please, won't you tell me what I can do?" I said, "Oh, yes," said the sage. "This is very simple." He said, "Look, she undoubtedly does know everything, but you'll have to test it." He said, "Look, here, take this jar of pebbles. Now, tonight, when you go back home after visiting the baker's shop, you acknowledge, yes, that she knows absolutely everything, and if she knows everything, that she wouldn't mind if you test her. So if she knows everything, she'll be able to tell you exactly how many stones there are in this jar. And if she doesn't know how many stones there are in the jar, you'll know that it's just your mind. It's trying to trick you. And of course, that very day he goes to the baker's shop and gets into conversation with the baker's daughter, and he goes back home, and sure enough, there it was. Again, you said, and so I saw what. And he said, yes, oh, I recognize you, absolutely know absolutely everything about me, but since you know everything about me, you'll be able to tell me how many stones there are in this jar. Silence. From that moment on, there was silence. And in the ways of things, of course, he proposed to the baker's daughter, and they had many children and lived happily ever after. And we may take these three very different little anecdotes or stories together. After we've been meditating, as we well know, that places us in a state of what you might call receptivity, where our minds are quiet to a degree. And it is a chemistry, rather than a mentation that goes on. In hearing these stories, we can ask, what is it that arises to our awareness out of that chemistry, like this smell that we have when we make soup and we put the carrots and the onions and turnips inside. There's an aroma that comes out that is clearly distinguishable, clearly recognizable, and yet we wouldn't call it carrot soup or turnip soup or onion soup. And yet we know what kind of soup it is. Isn't that right? So out of these three stories, what is it that rises to our awareness for you out of them? The aroma. Remembering that we're endeavoring to come to an understanding of the nature of emptiness. What do these three stories have the aroma of?
Illusionary nature of things. What came to mind during meditation is the nature of emptiness as movement. But it's like the emptiness is an illusion and the movement is an illusion. Because there's only the oneness.
Yes, yes.
But how much of that's our mind?
Yes,
That's
yes.
the big question.
It's very well put, because we recognize now, and we've talked about it before, this Satchitananda, this existence, knowledge and bliss, these three levels of life that we call the nitty-gritty, the airy-fairy and the transcendental. And we can call them that level where there's interaction, cause and effect, and the intuitive or the occult, where we have our dreams and our awarenesses and our intuition, and that level where we recognize the interrelatedness of everything. And they appear to be quite separate, and yet in every moment of their lives, those three are working for us. We really can't separate them. And yet they're always separate for us. And yet this recognition that these stories in creating chemistry allow us to experience those three as one. So it has another purpose other than, so there's more to the story than just understanding the nature of emptiness, isn't it, here? Which we're getting a glimmer of. Don't you agree with me? We're getting a glimmer of. So we can say Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge and bliss, and they're three separate syllables, three separate words that constitute life, the three levels of life. And to our mind, all right, they're one, but they're different. But in this experience, in experiencing the nature of emptiness, we have this, exactly what you're saying, the dot. But within that dot, everything is contained. So we're moving along somewhere, aren't we? In some way. But if we did it at a level of mind, we would be analysing those three. So it's all a ploy. It's all a big game.
Awareness happens.
Yeah. Yes.
With the three stories, there's little elements of deception in all three.
You bet.
Because you've got the jar tricking the voice, whether it be his own mind or not. Oh, okay. I don't know everything. Gone. There's the ammonia. Of course, the traveller didn't check to see what it was. He had a bit of trust, a little bit of deception from
Yes.
his friend. Oh, this will get you going. Oh.
Yes.
And with the sword expert or sword master, and they were gentlemen he didn't need to be with
Yes.
any swordsman, because
Absolutely.
doesn't fear death.
Yes.
Someone cuts his head off tomorrow, so what?
Yes.
So little elements of deception in all three stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there we're getting to the chemistry of them, isn't it? The chemistry of them.
Because it's our mind tells us.
Yes.
This is the thing. It's our mind tells us that it's an illusion, but even that's an illusion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Hence the deception.
Hence the
It's a
deception.
deception. That's right. Oh.
That's the deception. Yeah. And that's the play, isn't it?
It's the play.
That's
Yes.
the play and the ploys that we can use.
So the mind's not part of Satchitananda, is it? It's more observing them.
The mind is Satchitananda.
But it gets in the way and babbles at you.
Well, look at that story.
You need to find a jar of stones.
Yes.
You need a jar of stones.
I think I need ammonia.